Hello friends, today in this video we are going to discuss about type conversion or typecasting in Python. So what type conversion or typecasting actually is? As its name implies, type conversion or typecasting is nothing but converting some data or converting a variable from one data type to another data type. When you will build applications in Python, there will be several cases where it will be required to convert your data from one type to another type, that is one data type to another data type. Such conversion of data from one data type to another data type is called typecasting or type conversion. I'll give you a very simple use case where you need to perform such conversion, a very simple example of that. Suppose you need to determine whether a number is divisible by 5 or not, and you want the user to input that number from keyboard. So to take input from keyboard, Python provides you with a function called input. But the thing is that whatever you enter as input function accepts that as a string. So even if you enter an integer value like 1, 2, 3, still input function will accept it as a string. But to determine whether the number is divisible by 5, we have to use the modulo operator, which will give you the remainder when the number is divided by 5. But the problem is that modulo operator does not work with strings. So what you have to do, you have to first convert the number which was accepted as a string to integer and then do the necessary operations. Let's flip to Jupyter Notebook and let's see the entire thing in action. Now that we have flipped to Jupyter Notebook, now let's take the input from the user and store that in a variable suppose called num. Suppose the name of the variable is num and we store the input in that variable. So as I have already mentioned, this input function actually takes the input from the keyboard. So let's give the user the message, enter a number. Okay, let's run the cell. Okay, let the number be 255. Press enter. Okay, now let's print the variable num in which the user input is stored. Let's print the variable. So it's 255. Now look at this thing very carefully. So from the number, from the input that has been input through keyboard, it looks like that it is an integer, right? But let's see whether it is actually taken as an integer or not. The input that was accepted through this input function, whether that is actually an integer or not. Let's see that. You can clearly see that it is not an integer, but it is a string. To determine whether the number 255 is actually divisible by 5 or not, we have an operator called modulo operator. It looks like percentage, what we generally call percentage. So in programming we call this a modulo operator. What it does, it actually gives you the remainder when you divide a number with another number. So let's see what it actually does. If you divide 244 by 5, the modulo operator gives you the remainder of this division. Let's see what it does. So what should it give? It should give you 4, because when you divide 244 by 5, the remainder is 4. Let's see whether it prints 4 or not. Yes, it prints 4. So this is clear, guys. This modulo operator actually gives you the remainder when you divide a number by some other number. Okay. Now let's try to apply this modulo operator on this num variable. Let's try to apply that. Num mod 5. Let's run the cell. So we get an error. Not all arguments converted during string formatting. So the modulo operator is not applicable on strings. So to use this modulo operator, what we have to do, we have to convert this variable, which is a string variable, to an integer variable. Now let's see how we can do that. So there is a function called int, in which if you pass this variable and then you store this variable again in the variable called num, and then let's try to print the type of the variable num. Let's try to print both of them, the variable and the type of the variable. Okay, let's run the cell. Okay, so the value of the variable is 255, but now look at this. Earlier the type of the variable was str, that is string. Now the type of the variable has changed to integer. Now we can easily apply the modulo operator on this integer variable and do our job as required. So let's check. Let's try to get the remainder. rem equal to num mod 5. Let's see what it gives us, and print rem. So as expected, as the number 255 is divisible by 5, so it gives us the remainder 0. So from this we can easily say that the number 255 is divisible by 5. Okay, so we can, as we have not yet discussed about the if-else statements, that's why I have not done it using the if-else statement. I have just found out the remainder and printed the remainder to manually check whether the number is actually divisible by 5 or not. So if you want to use the if-else statement, you can do it like this. It's very simple. Num mod 5 equal to 0. Print number is divisible by 5, else so that's how you write a typical if-else statement. So you don't need to worry if you don't understand these statements. All these control statements, we will discuss them in detail in our coming videos. This video is about type conversion. Just focus on this thing, how we converted the type of the variable from string to integer. Earlier it was a string variable, but when we applied the int function on it, it became an integer variable. Okay, just run this cell once and we get the desired output. Okay, just like the way we have converted a string to an integer, we can perform other conversions as well, like an integer to a float to an integer to a string, and so on. So let's flip to the slide and look at some of the very important points related to type conversion or typecasting. So as I have just mentioned, you can convert from one numeric type to another numeric type with the int, float, complex methods. This type conversion is not only restricted to numeric types. As long as two data types and their values are compatible to each other, we can easily convert one type to another. For example, an integer can be converted to a str, and a str can be converted to integer as long as the str variable actually looks like an int. So first look at this point. You can convert from one numeric type to another numeric type with the int, float, complex methods. So let's see that in action. Okay, first let us try to convert a float to an integer. Let's take a float variable f equal to 200.758, and let's convert that to an integer I. Let's see what happens. Okay, guys, you can see when you convert this number 200.758 to an integer, it becomes 200. So it's very straightforward. The decimal part, that is the part after the decimal point, is discarded, and the whole part, that is the integer part, is remaining. So that this is very straightforward. Okay, now let's try the reverse of this operation. Let's try to convert an integer to a float. Let's take this integer 520 and let's try to convert it to a float. Okay, let's run this cell and we get 520.0, which is the expected output. So as it is a float, it is expressed in a decimal point form. Okay, so we have seen the conversion from float to integer and integer to float. Now there is one more numeric type left, that is the complex type. Now let's try to convert an integer to a complex type. Let's take this integer 210 and try to convert it to an complex type. And let's print this variable comp and let's see what happens. So we have run this cell and we have got this output 210 plus 0j. Okay, so when we convert an integer to a complex number, the integer that we are converting to the complex number becomes the real part of the complex number, and for the imaginary part the coefficient becomes 0. So we get 210 plus 0j. So if we convert a float to a complex number, the same thing will happen. The float will become the real part and the coefficient of the imaginary part will be 0. So let's verify that as well. Let's run this cell. Okay, let's take a float. Let's run this cell and we get 210.5 plus 0j. Now let's see what happens when we try to convert a complex number to some other numeric type. That is, we have three numeric types: int, float and complex number. Let's see what happens when we try to convert a complex number to either integer or a float. Let's take this complex number 5 plus 10j and try to convert it to a integer. Let's directly print this integer and let's see what happens. Okay, let's run this cell and look at this. Python immediately raises an error saying can't convert complex to int. So Python does not allow to convert complex number to integer. So does it allow to convert from complex number to float? Let's check that. Let's run this cell. Again, Python says the same thing, can't convert complex to float. So Python does not allow the conversion from complex to either integer or float. That's what you have to keep in your mind. Now let's look at another very interesting thing. Till now we have done the conversion between the numeric types, like from integer to float or float to integer or integer to complex, like that. Now let's try to do the conversion between dissimilar data types. Let's try to do conversion between integer and string. Let's take a string s equal to 1 to 3 and let's try to convert it to an integer. Let's run the cell. Let's run the cell and see what we get. We get 123 as expected. Now again, let's try to convert another string to an integer. Let's try to take 123.5 or 123.5 and let's try to convert it to an integer. So what do you think, guys? Will it raise any error? Yes, it raises an error. It says invalid literal for int with base 10 123.5. So while doing a conversion or while doing a typecasting, you have to keep in mind that the string that you are trying to convert to an integer that actually has to look like an integer. Does this string actually look like an integer? No. That's why Python is not able to convert it to an integer. So Python raises this error. Okay, now instead of converting this string to an integer, let's try to convert this string to a float and let's see what happens. Let's run this cell and we get the desired output, that is 123.5. As this string actually looks like a float, Python does not raise any error and can successfully do the typecasting and converts this string to a float. Okay, now that we have seen the conversion to integer and float from string, let's do the reverse as well. Let's try to convert an integer or a float to a string. Let's take an integer I, that is 250, and let's try to convert it to a string and store it in a variable called str1. Let's print this variable and let's also check the type of the variable. Okay, let's run this cell and you can see that the integer 250 has been converted to a string, and we can also check the type of the variable, that is string. Okay, so we can do the same thing with float as well. This is quite similar. 250.5, and we print the variable as well as the type, run the cell, and we get the desired output. Now let's see the conversion of Boolean variables to other type of variables. Boolean variable can hold only two values, either true or false. So let's see what happens when we convert a Boolean variable to an integer variable. Okay, one more thing, as I have just mentioned, Boolean variable can hold only two type of values, true and false. Here true represents 1 and false represents 0. So let's try to convert a Boolean variable. Let's try to convert a Boolean variable to an integer. And let's see what happens. Okay, let's run the cell. As I have just mentioned, true represents 1. So when we convert the Boolean variable true to an integer, it prints 1. Similarly, if we convert a Boolean variable which holds a value false to an integer, it will print 0. So similar for float. Instead of printing 1, it will print 1.0, that is a decimal representation as it is a float. And again, if we convert it to the false value to a float, it will print this. It will print this 0.0 as expected. So now let's try to convert B is, let's try to convert the true value, that is the Boolean variable which is holding true, to a complex number. Let's run the cell. As expected, it gives 1 plus 0j. Just because true is representing 1, the real part is 1, and there is no representation of the imaginary part, so the coefficient of the imaginary part is 0. So it gives 1 plus 0j. Similarly, for false, what it should give? For false, what it should give for false? What do you think, guys? Yes, you are right. It will give 0j or 0 plus 0j or 0j, whatever you want to say it. Okay, guys, so this is what happens when you convert a Boolean value to an integer or a float. So that's it for the video, friends. In this video, we have discussed how we can convert some data, or we can convert a variable from one data type to another data type. That's it. So friends, I have given you two exercise problems. Please solve these problems and you can let me know the answer of the first question in the comment section itself. If you have liked my video, please subscribe to my channel and please hit the bell icon so that you get notified when I'll upload more Python and data science related videos. And please don't forget to like and share my video so that it reaches a larger audience and they also get benefited from it. Thanks a lot for watching.